This video is sponsored by Nebula, the educational streaming service created by me and my creator friends. Check out the link in the description for an exclusive video, or stay tuned to learn more. Whenever I talk about the massive regional rail plans moving forward in Toronto, I have to mention that the project covers just 5 of GO Transit's 7 lines, which is even more painful because one of the 2 remaining lines, the Milton Line, has historically been one of GO's best used routes. Despite typically only running a North American commuter schedule, that is in the morning and out in the evening, the Milton Line has put up solid numbers. That one of the most used commuter rail lines on the continent isn't getting the frequent and electric treatment is obviously bad. And this is especially true because the line weaves its way through the surprisingly dense, for North American suburbia, city of Mississauga, which is basically a total rapid transit desert, and we don't really have any other plans to fix that. More service has been promised and then not delivered many times, and even I've been burned by this. That's why a recent announcement by the government that they have an actual plan to deliver all-day frequent service on the Milton Line is so exciting. But what's the plan, what are the pitfalls, and knowing Toronto, what's the price tag? I imagined, what if the Minister of Transportation had to make a decision about this project, and put that in this video. So let's take a look. This is RM Transit, a channel about transit plans and whether they're good or not. The Milton Line is one of GO's 7 lines, and historically has moved some of the highest numbers of any of the different routes, despite only running in the morning and out in the evening. The reason for the limited service comes down to the corridor, which is Canadian Pacific Railway's main freight route through Canada's largest city, as well as its operator, Canadian Pacific, being a lot less friendly to passenger trains than Canadian National Railway, which also actually owns some of the tracks that GO trains run on. I've actually talked about this critical line for CP in a previous video. So what's the big update? Well, the government has announced that Metrolinx has a roughly $6 billion plan to institute proper frequent service on the Milton Line, which would be done by building a fully separated passenger rail line. This might sound out there, but this is exactly the approach that GO took to provide frequent rail service to Pickering, Oshawa, and Whitby. Trains on the Lakeshore East Line share a corridor with freight trains from CN through Durham, but they both operate on entirely separate tracks that don't interact, allowing GO and CN to run trains independently and for GO to run as many trains as it wants. The possibilities for a similar arrangement on the Milton Line are huge. The corridor is already popular, and it's ripe for service improvements, densification, and extensions. But hold up, why is the price tag so high? Right now, the Milton corridor is really quite blended. GO trains and CP freight trains use the same infrastructure, and GO trains need to cross CP tracks to access the stations. So to get things into a fully separated state, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Starting on the east end, where GO trains enter the corridor from just north of Bloor GO Station, you can already see one of the yards that CP uses on the north side of the corridor. And the tracks that carry all trains narrow down to just 2 tracks when they cross the Humber River on a rather dramatic bridge, which would have to be twinned at great expense to give the Milton Line its own separated tracks. Along the entire line, there would need to be a lot of shifting around and small corridor expansions to give GO its own dedicated tracks and not get it in CP's way. Another expensive piece of infrastructure that would be needed is a flyover somewhere along the line. You see, when GO trains enter the Milton corridor from just north of Bloor GO Station, they're on the south side of the corridor, but most of the stations are on the north side, and this necessitates the GO trains crossing in front of potential CP freight. I would probably suggest putting this flyover somewhere west of Kipling Station, which would probably need to be rebuilt, but it's not that nice today. The reason to put the flyover west of Kipling is that that would enable a connection into the campus subdivision that would allow Lakeshore trains to easily divert onto the new frequent capable Milton Line tracks in case of a delay or diversion. Along the way, you'd probably have to rebuild a number of stations. I already mentioned Kipling, and Dixie would need that treatment too. The others would likely also need changes, but they could be more modest. In the Streetsville area of western Mississauga, there are a number of grade crossings. You'd probably want to get rid of those to run a very frequent service, though every 10 or 15 minutes probably makes them fine. If a grade separation option were to be taken, you'd probably want to do a trench or an elevated guideway like we've seen so often in Melbourne. One really exciting opportunity that this new deal for the Milton Line would open up is an extension of the line to Cambridge at the south end of Waterloo region. This has been long talked about, but it wasn't something that really penciled out with the existing peak-only trains already mostly being full. What's nice about this extension is that it could really nicely connect with the southern extension of the existing Ion Light Rail system in Waterloo Region. That is, if they can ever get their costs for that extension under control. There's also the question of whether this deal only applies to the Milton Line or also the Midtown Line through central Toronto, which would certainly increase its value. Honestly, if the deal applies to the Milton Line, it would also make sense for it to apply to the Midtown Line, since there are less industries along it where passenger trains might get in the way of freight, and because there's already lots of room in the corridor for 4 or sometimes more tracks. I did an entire dedicated video on the Midtown Line and what you could potentially do with it in the past, but I think a basic service of every 15 minutes could be really valuable and nicely augment Milton Line trains headed downtown. I wouldn't send Milton Line trains to Summerhill Station, as is sometimes suggested, because Summerhill isn't downtown. It's not really all that close to anything, and the Yonge subway is already saturated, so the idea that passengers would be able to get onto the subway to get downtown probably isn't going to work. There are a few other things to consider as well. For example, a lot of people ask me why the Milton Line doesn't stop at Bloor GO Station, where you can get on the Up Express, Kitchener Line trains, and Line 2 of the subway, as well as streetcars. I think the main reason here is space, and I think changing this is going to be a non-starter for quite some time, because the reality is there just isn't a lot of space at Bloor GO for more platforms. Pull up your favorite mapping app and you can see that even the existing Kitchener Line platforms aren't the full 10-meter width. One of them is narrower, and today we can just barely fit those platforms and all of the tracks we need into the corridor. Now, the truth is, having Milton Line trains stop at Bloor is very reasonable. While passengers can transfer from the Milton Line to Line 2 at Kipling, that leads to a long trip if their final destination or connection is at Dundas West and Bloor. Fitting Milton Line platforms in here is not going to be trivial. One option in the short term is probably sharing the local Kitchener Line platforms, which should be fine given that there are 4 tracks for the Kitchener Line heading through Bloor Station. However, in the long term, we might want to consider a second elevated level for Bloor GO Station. This would allow 2 wide ground level Kitchener Line platforms, which could serve the ground level Kitchener Line tracks, and a wide elevated platform for the Milton Line, serving elevated tracks that could return to ground level on either end of the station. It would also probably be worth considering adding additional stations to the Milton Line within Toronto. Perhaps serving the Junction, which is a popular neighborhood not directly served by rapid transit today, and the Kingsway and Royal York area, which is quite a distance from the existing Line 2 alignment. There would likely be some NIMBYism to expanding the Milton Line through Toronto, particularly in these areas, and offering up stations could be a good pro-transit antidote. Plus, every other GO line will have more stops within the city of Toronto than the Milton Line by the time this project gets done, with the only non-Union Station Milton Line stop within Toronto right now being Kipling. Of course, the other big investment that I would really like to see into the Milton Line, and this is one that would cost more and take a lot more planning than the other options, is a diversion of the line through Mississauga City Centre. Likely, this would head underground just after Cooksville Station, serve a station or 2 at City Centre, and then pop above ground to run elevated or at grade in the 403 highway corridor before meeting back up with the Milton Line. This project was recommended in the Toronto Regional Board of Trade report and would be quite expensive, but it would mean that downtown Mississauga would finally have a fast rail link to downtown Toronto, which seems like an obvious thing. It would also mean that the city centre finally has a major train station or 2 to develop around and actually cement its status as the downtown of Mississauga. Despite what you might expect, both this and adding dedicated Milton Line platforms at Bloor GO in the long term aren't outlandish ideas. And Metrolink should be able to build them without issue if it adopts electric multiple units for the GO network, like I suggested in a previous video. If we had high-performance, single-level electric multiple unit trains operating at least on the Milton Line, then these 2 pieces of infrastructure, as big as they seem, could be built similar to subway infrastructure, and they don't seem that crazy as subway infrastructure. In fact, they honestly probably don't even need to cost that much, though given that this is Toronto, I'm sure we'll find a way. Now the big question here with everything is, what about the cost for the entire project? $6 billion is a lot, no? Well, in a moment of unusual, I might add, transparency, the previous federal transportation minister tweeted out that the previous cost Metrolinx had presented them with for 2-way all-day service was about $1.2 billion. And that's fair enough, but 2-way all-day doesn't really mean anything. That could have been a train every hour or 2. So while $6 billion is like 6 times higher than the previous price, if we get a fully separated set of tracks on the Milton Line for that price, we could run more than 10 times as many trains. In the discussions I've had, I've also heard that the $6 billion figure has been scoffed at, but that doesn't make any sense. For one, we're spending so much money on so many different transportation projects in this region. The idea that a priority that we've had for literal decades would cost us $6 billion should not generate scoffing. For anyone that thinks $6 billion is a lot of money, I'd point out that we are building tram routes in Toronto right now for billions of dollars, like the Finch West LRT, so that number really shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. This is your regular reminder that Metrolinx cannot build cost effectively, so we have infrastructure costs that are several times higher than in other developed countries, like Korea or Spain. The reality is, though, that the Milton Line with dedicated passenger tracks could operate a lot like a subway into Mississauga, and there is no way that Metrolinx is building a regular subway to Mississauga for less than $6 billion. So if you're catching my drift, I think we should move forward with the Milton Line plan, but we need to be smart about it. There are a lot of things that should be included or at least planned for in the future. You see, Metrolinx, reflecting a seeming lack of confidence that it would ever be able to operate frequent service on the Milton Line, has kind of shot itself in the foot with regard to the line over the years. For one, there are no planned additional stations within the city of Toronto, which I already mentioned we should probably be adding. And I actually also think we should probably be adding one somewhere south of Bloor to help take the pressure off Union. A good location could be around Dundas and Lansdowne, where Barrie Line and Milton Line trains could interchange, allowing for easy journeys from the north of Toronto to the west and vice versa. This would also provide valuable transit service to a dense but underserved part of Toronto, which currently only has streetcars, and it would be far enough away from the planned Bloor-Lansdowne station on the Barrie Line as to not be a non-starter. Of course, we should also have a full-scale station at Spadina, which Milton Line trains could stop at, but that's the topic of another video. Speaking of shooting oneself in the foot regarding the Milton Line, the original plans for the King Liberty Smart Track station actually had 2 platforms for various Kitchener Line services and only 1 track for the Milton Line, which would have been really bad now. Fortunately, we've dodged that bullet, and the current 1-platform plan maintains 2 tracks for the Milton Line through King Liberty. Interestingly, the Hurontario Tram LRT streetcar line was also meant to have a better connection at Cooksville GO station where the Milton Line stops. That direct connection from the light rail platform to the GO station was cut, but it should probably be added back if we're going to have frequent Milton Line service. One thing that hasn't come up nearly enough in discussion is the Orangeville-Brampton Railway, or OBRI. Unfortunately, Metrolinx decided not to protect OBRI when it was put up for closure not that long ago. Now, to be fair, 2 or 3 years ago, OBRI might have not looked all that useful as a line from downtown Brampton to middle of nowhere western Mississauga, but with frequent service on the Milton Line, suddenly OBRI seems like a super useful thing. It's a second link from downtown Brampton to downtown Toronto and a connection into Meadowvale Business Park. In addition, with a Milton Line diversion through Mississauga City Centre, you'd also probably be creating the fastest link between downtown Brampton and downtown Mississauga that would exist. All of this is a case study in why protecting rail lines makes so much sense. Even if that rail line doesn't make a ton of sense today in isolation, you never know what other rail lines might be available in the future that, combined with that original rail line, could create something really valuable. Now, something else that I think should be protected for is a Y at the north end of the link through Mississauga City Centre, because if you combine this with the western link from Pearson Airport that I discussed in my Better Pearson Airport Transit Hub video, then you could have another direct link from downtown Toronto to Mississauga City Centre. That would be really valuable because it would mean 2 rail links between downtown Toronto and downtown Brampton as well as downtown Mississauga, which would be fantastic. So all in all, there's good and there's bad with this new deal for the Milton Line. On the bad side, Metrolinx has not really been forward thinking in linking together other projects with a high frequency version of this line. At the same time, a lack of commitment on EMUs, the modern style of train used across the world in virtually every frequent regional rail system, has left the idea of some of the most valuable possible elements of this project, like a diversion through Mississauga City Centre, up in the air until a decision is actually made about EMUs sometime in the future, when costs will surely have gone up. That being said, for all of the transit value that this project unlocks long term, there's no doubt in my mind that we should be doing it. Even if we spend too much, it will honestly be the best money we've spent since the Ontario line. Now, we've talked a lot about all the different things Toronto and Metrolinx are doing to make the GO rail network into the ultimate regional transportation system for the Golden Horseshoe. But what do I think this system should look like, and what does the network still need? I talk all about my dream vision for the GO rail network in this exclusive video that you can watch on Nebula right now. Nebula is the streaming platform owned by me and my creator friends, featuring over 14,000 titles that you can watch ad-free, including exclusive and early access videos from urbanist educational creators like myself, City Nerd, and City Beautiful. And of course, you can check out episodes of Jet Lag the Game a week early, so you won't ever miss out on any of the action. Season 9 is coming out next week, so make sure to check out all the previous seasons to catch up. Supporting me on Nebula is one of the best ways you can support my channel and my content as a whole. And right now, you can get an awesome deal on yearly memberships for only $2.50 a month. So go check out the link in the description at go.nebula.tv/rmtransit right now.